The heart monitor's steady beeping was the only sound keeping me tethered to consciousness when my son Michael walked into the hospital room. 3 days after my emergency surgery, and he was carrying that leather briefcase I'd bought him for his first job interview 15 years ago. Back then, I thought it would help him with professional, mature. Now, watching him set it down with the calculated precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment, I realized I should have been more careful about what I'd taught him about appearances. "Dad, we need to talk about your finances." His voice carried that tone he'd perfected in his corporate job, the one that made me proud at company barbecues, but somehow felt wrong when directed at me. "The medical bills are going to be substantial, and with Mom's nursing home costs." I shifted against the hospital pillows, my chest still tender from where they'd cracked me open to fix what 68 years of living had broken. "Michael, I've got insurance and savings." The words came out weaker than I'd intended, but the sentiment was solid. I'd been planning for this kind of emergency since he was in diapers. "That's what I want to discuss." He opened the briefcase with a soft click, pulling out a stack of papers that looked official enough to make my stomach clench. "I've been looking into your assets, and honestly, Dad, you're going to need to liquidate some things. The house is tied up in that reverse mortgage mess, but the car." He paused, and I caught something in his expression that reminded me of when he was 12 and had broken my favorite fishing rod. The Mustang could bring in enough to cover the next few months. My 1967 Shelby GT500, grabber blue with white racing stripes. I'd bought it the year Michael was born, back when I was young enough to believe I'd drive it forever, and stupid enough to think forever was longer than it actually is. For 37 years, it had been more than transportation. It was Saturday mornings with Michael learning to change oil, Sunday drives with his mother before the Alzheimer's took her mind, and quiet evenings in the garage when the house felt too empty after she moved to the facility. "The car's not for sale, Michael." I tried to sit up straighter, but the pain in my chest made me think better of it. "There are other options. I can sell some of the tools, maybe the boat." "Dad, be practical." He leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne. When had my son started wearing cologne to visit his father in the hospital? "The boat's worth maybe 3,000. The tools might bring in a few hundred. The Mustang is worth 65,000 minimum, maybe 70 if we find the right collector." $70,000! I'd never thought of my car in terms of money. It was measured in memories, in the weight of Michael's small hands helping me polish the chrome, in the sound of his laughter when I'd let him rev the engine in the driveway. But looking at my son now, his manicured nails, his silk tie, his eyes that seemed to be calculating something I couldn't quite figure out, I wondered when those memories had been reduced to a dollar amount in his mind. "I need to think about it." The words felt like surrender, but I was too tired to fight. Surgery does that to you, strips away your defenses and leaves you vulnerable to people who love you just enough to make their betrayal hurt worse. "Of course, Dad. Take your time." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "But don't take too long. The bills are already piling up, and Mom's facility is threatening to... Well, we'll talk about that later. You just focus on getting better." After he left, I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the holes in each square to keep my mind from wandering to places it shouldn't go. The nurse, a kind woman named Rosa, who reminded me of my late wife's sister, came in to check my vitals. "That your son?" she asked, adjusting the IV drip. "Handsome man. Looks like he's doing well for himself." "Yeah, he is." I watched her work, noting the gentle way she handled the equipment, the genuine concern in her eyes. "Rosa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "If someone needed to sell something valuable to pay medical bills, would they need the owner's permission?" She paused, her hands stilling on the IV tube. "Well, legally speaking, yes, unless there's a power of attorney or something like that." "Why? Is everything okay?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. Michael had never asked me to sign any papers giving him control over my assets. which meant he couldn't sell the car without my signature, unless I remembered the papers in his briefcase, the official look of them. Had I signed something when I was foggy from the anesthesia? The first day after surgery was mostly a blur of pain medication and half-conscious conversations. Rosa, did my son visit while I was unconscious, right after the surgery? Her expression shifted, becoming more careful. I wasn't on duty then, but I can check the visitor logs if you want. Is there something specific you're worried about? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. Michael, Dad, I found a buyer for the Mustang. He's offering $68,000 cash. I told him we'd have an answer by tomorrow. Feel better. My hands shook as I read the message again. Found a buyer? As if the decision had already been made. As if my car was already gone. But there was something Michael didn't know about that car, something I'd never told him. 2 years ago, after reading about a rash of classic car thefts in the area, I'd had a GPS tracking device installed. Not the kind you could easily find. It was hidden deep in the dashboard, disguised as part of the original wiring. The monthly monitoring fee came out of my account automatically, and I'd forgotten about it until now. I looked at my phone again, thinking about the tracking app I downloaded but never used. If Michael was planning to sell my car without my permission, I'd know exactly where it was. And, more importantly, I'd know exactly what my son was really made of. The heart monitor picked up speed, beeping faster as my pulse quickened. Outside my window, I could see the parking garage where I'd left the Mustang 3 days ago. It was probably still there, waiting for me to come home. But something told me that when I got out of this hospital bed, I was going to learn things about my son that I'd spent 37 years refusing to see. The discharge nurse handed me my belongings in a plastic bag, and I fumbled through them with fingers that still trembled from the medication. My phone, my wallet, my keys, all there, but somehow everything felt different. Like I'd been gone longer than 4 days. Like I'd crossed some invisible line between the man who'd driven himself to the emergency room and the man who was about to discover what his son had done in his absence. The discharge nurse handed me my belongings in a plastic bag, and I fumbled through them with fingers that still trembled from the medication. My phone, my wallet, my keys, all there, but somehow everything felt different. Like I'd been gone longer than 4 days. Like I'd crossed some invisible line between the man who'd driven himself to the emergency room and the man who was about to discover what his son had done in his absence. "You sure you don't want to call someone for a ride?" Rosa asked, watching me struggle with the button on my shirt. Post-surgery patients really shouldn't be driving yet. "I'll be fine," I lied, because the truth was too complicated to explain. How could I tell her that I needed to see my car myself, needed to know if it was still sitting in space 247 where I'd left it, or if my son had already turned my memories into cash? The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like descending into a different world. 4 days ago, I'd been Robert Harrison, retired electrician, devoted husband to a woman who no longer remembered my name, and father to a son who called every Sunday. Now, I was Robert Harrison, recent widower to all intents and purposes, recent cardiac patient, and father to a son who might have stolen my car. Space 247 was empty. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the oil stain on the concrete where my Mustang had been parked. 37 years of oil changes, and that car had never leaked a drop. The stain was from some other vehicle, some other person's mechanical problems. My car was gone, and with it, the last tangible connection to the man I used to be. My phone buzzed. "Michael, Dad, I handled the car sale. The buyer paid cash, and I've deposited the money in your account. You don't need to worry about anything. Focus on recovering." I read the message 3 times, each reading making it worse. Handled the car sale. Not, "I sold your car," or "I made a decision about your car." He'd handled it, like it was a business transaction he'd been authorized to complete, like I was already dead. My fingers shook as I opened the tracking app I'd installed 2 years ago. The screen loaded slowly, showing a map of the city with a single blue dot blinking about 15 miles from the hospital. The car was moving, heading east on the interstate toward the wealthy part of town where houses cost more than I'd made in a decade. I called a cab, my chest aching with each breath. The driver, a young man with kind eyes and a thick accent, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay, sir? You look like you need to be in a hospital." "I just got out of one." I showed him the tracking app. "I need you to follow this dot. Can you do that?" He squinted at the screen, then at me. "Is this some kind of spy thing? Because I've seen movies where—" "It's my car. Someone took my car, and I need to see where it is." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because he nodded and pulled into traffic. "We'll find your car, sir. Don't worry." The blue dot led us through neighborhoods I barely recognized, past shopping centers and office buildings that had sprouted up in the years since I'd stopped paying attention to development. The city had grown around me while I was focused on keeping my marriage together, on working enough overtime to pay for experimental treatments that didn't work, on pretending that everything was normal when nothing had been normal for years. We stopped at a red light, and I noticed the driver studying me in the mirror again. "Can I ask you something, sir? How do you know someone took your car? Maybe they borrowed it." The question hit me harder than it should have, because the answer was simple. I knew because my son had lied to me. Not just about selling the car, but about asking my permission. The text messages, the carefully chosen words, the way he'd presented it as a done deal, all of it designed to make me believe I'd agreed to something I'd never agreed to. "My son sold it," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, without asking. The light turned green, and we continued following the dot. The driver was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry, sir, that's not right." No, it wasn't right, but it was consistent with the man Michael had become. The man who'd started visiting less often after his mother got sick, who'd begun talking about her care costs and difficult decisions like she was a financial burden instead of the woman who'd raised him. The man who'd somehow convinced himself that stealing from his father was an act of love. The tracking dot stopped moving. We were in Hillcrest, the kind of neighborhood where doctors and lawyers lived, where the driveways were circular and the garages were bigger than most people's houses. The app showed my car stationary at 1247 Oakwood Drive, a sprawling Tudor-style home with manicured landscaping and a 3-car garage. "That's it," I told the driver. "That's where my car is." He pulled up across the street, and we sat there staring at the house. Everything about it screamed money, the kind of money that comes from making the right investments, marrying the right person, and never having to choose between your principles and your comfort. "What do you want to do?" the driver asked. Before I could answer, the garage door opened, then my Mustang emerged like a ghost from my past. The afternoon sun hit the grabber blue paint, and for a moment, I forgot about the betrayal, forgot about the hospital bills, forgot about everything except the beauty of that car and the memories it carried. A man in his 50s was driving it, carefully, respectfully, like he understood what he was handling. He turned onto the street, and I caught a glimpse of his face through the windshield. He was smiling, the kind of smile I used to wear when I drove that car. The kind of smile that said he'd gotten something he'd been wanting for a long time. "Follow him," I said. The driver nodded, and we pulled into traffic behind my stolen car. The man drove it well, shifting smoothly through the gears, taking corners with the confidence of someone who understood performance vehicles. Part of me was glad he wasn't some kid who'd burn out the clutch or wrap it around a tree. But the larger part of me was dying inside, watching a stranger enjoying something that had been mine for 37 years. My phone rang. Michael. "Dad, I hope you're resting. I wanted to let you know the car sale went through without any problems. The buyer is a collector. He'll take good care of it. And the money is already in your account, so you don't have to worry about the hospital bills. I watched my car turn into a shopping center parking lot, watched the new owner get out and walk around it with the reverence of someone who just acquired a piece of automotive history. Michael, I never signed anything giving you permission to sell my car. Silence on the other end. Then, Dad, you're probably still confused from the surgery. We talked about this. You agreed it was the best solution. I never agreed to anything. My voice was getting stronger, fueled by a rage I hadn't felt in years, and I never signed any papers. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The medication, the stress of the surgery? My thinking is perfectly clear. Clear enough to know that you stole my car and forged my signature. I was guessing about the forgery, but his sharp intake of breath told me I was right. Clear enough to know that I'm looking at it right now. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming the voice of a stranger. Dad, what's done is done. The money is in your account. You need it for Mom's care and your medical bills. I did what needed to be done. You did what you wanted to do. I watched the new owner lock my car and walk away. And now I'm going to do what I need to do. I hung up and looked at the cab driver, who'd been listening to every word. Sir, I think you need to call the police. Officer Martinez was younger than my son, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who dealt with family disputes before. We sat in the shopping center parking lot, my stolen Mustang gleaming 30 feet away, while I explained the situation for the third time. So, let me make sure I understand, she said, reviewing her notes. Your son sold your car without your permission while you were in the hospital. You never signed any transfer documents or gave him power of attorney, and you can prove ownership. I handed her the registration and title, both clearly in my name. I've owned that car for 37 years. I've got every maintenance record, every receipt, every document that proves it's mine. She studied the papers, then looked at the car. It's definitely worth pursuing, but I have to ask, is there any chance you might have agreed to the sale while you were medicated? Sometimes patients don't remember conversations that happened right after surgery. Officer, I may be old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm not confused. I pulled out my phone, showing her the tracking app. I knew this might happen, so I had GPS installed. I've been tracking my own car since I got out of the hospital this morning. Her eyebrows went up. You had it tracked? Why would you do that if you didn't suspect something? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding, because deep down, I knew what my son had become. I just didn't want to admit it. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. He's been pushing me to sell things, to liquidate assets, as he calls it, always for my own good, of course. Officer Martinez nodded, making notes. Has he taken anything else? I thought about it. I don't know. I haven't been home since the surgery, but there were some papers in his briefcase when he visited, official-looking documents. He might have... I trailed off, realizing I'd been so focused on the car that I hadn't considered what else might be missing. We'll need to check that out, but first, let's deal with this car. She looked around the parking lot. The buyer is going to be back eventually. When he does, we'll explain the situation. If he has legitimate purchase documents, he might be a victim too. As if summoned by her words, a silver BMW pulled into the parking lot. The man who'd been driving my car got out, walking toward the Mustang with a set of keys in his hand. He was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with the confident stride of someone who just made a significant purchase. "That's him," I said. Officer Martinez approached the man while I stayed in the patrol car watching the conversation unfold. At first, the buyer looked confused, then concerned, then angry. He pulled out a folder from his car showing Martinez documents that were apparently legitimate enough to make her frown. When she returned to the patrol car, her expression was grim. He's got a bill of sale signed by someone claiming to be you. The signature looks authentic, and he paid $68,000 in cash. He thinks he's the legitimate owner. My hands clenched into fists. My son forged my signature. That's what it looks like, but proving forgery can be complicated, especially when the signature is this good. She showed me a photo of the bill of sale on her phone. The signature did look like mine, too much like mine. Has your son ever had access to documents with your signature? He's been handling some of my wife's nursing home paperwork. I've signed dozens of forms over the past year. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Michael had been practicing, learning to copy my signature well enough to steal from me. How long has he been planning this? That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to sort this out with the buyer. He's threatening to call his lawyer. The next hour was a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and increasingly heated discussions. The buyer, Dr. James Peterson, was understandably upset about purchasing what might be stolen property. He'd bought the car through a classified ad, met my son at a neutral location, and followed what he thought were proper procedures. I collect classic cars, Dr. Peterson explained, showing me photos on his phone of a garage full of vintage vehicles. I've been looking for a '67 Shelby for years. When I saw the ad, I knew I had to have it. Your son seemed legitimate. He knew everything about the car's history, had all the right paperwork. Of course he did. Michael had grown up with that car, had helped me restore parts of it, had listened to me tell stories about every scratch and modification. He'd used our shared history to steal from me more effectively. Dr. Peterson, I understand you're a victim here too, I said, but that's my car. I never agreed to sell it. He looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. I paid $68,000 for it. I have a bill of sale. I can't just walk away from that kind of money. Officer Martinez stepped in. Here's what we're going to do. The car is evidence in a potential fraud case, so it's going to be impounded until we can sort this out. Dr. Peterson, you'll need to work with the district attorney's office to recover your money. Mr. Harrison, you'll need to file a formal complaint against your son. The word son sounded strange in that context, like we were talking about someone else's child, someone else's betrayal. But as I watched the tow truck load my Mustang onto its flatbed, I realized that's exactly what had happened. The son I'd raised, the boy who'd sat in that car's passenger seat learning about responsibility and integrity, was gone. In his place was a man who'd stolen from his father and convinced himself it was justified. My phone buzzed with another message from Michael. Dad, I know you're upset, but you need to understand that I did this for you. The medical bills alone are going to be crushing. I couldn't let you lose everything because you were too stubborn to make the hard choices. I showed the message to Officer Martinez. He still thinks he's the hero in this story. She shook her head. That's common in financial elder abuse cases. The perpetrator convinces themselves they're helping, that they know better than the victim. It doesn't make it legal, and it doesn't make it right. Elder abuse. The term hit me like a slap. I'd thought of myself as many things: husband, father, retiree, heart patient, but never as an abuse victim. Never as someone who needed protection from his own child. What happens now? I asked. Now we build a case. We'll need to examine your financial records, look for other instances of unauthorized transactions. We'll investigate how your son got access to your signature and whether he's taken anything else. She handed me a card. And you'll need to secure your accounts, change your passwords, maybe consider involving an elder law attorney. As the tow truck disappeared around the corner, taking my car to an impound lot, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. For too long, I'd been making excuses for Michael's behavior, explaining away his distance and his increasing focus on money. I'd told myself he was just worried about me, just trying to help. But worry doesn't forge signatures. Love doesn't steal. Dr. Peterson approached me as Officer Martinez finished her report. "Mr. Harrison, I want you to know that if your car is returned to you, I won't fight it. I was scammed too, and I hope they catch whoever did this." "Thank you." I shook his hand, noting the genuine regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this. My son, he's not who I thought he was." "Family can be complicated." He glanced at the empty space where my car had been parked. "But that's a beautiful machine. I hope you get it back." As the cab drove me home, I thought about what I'd find when I got there. What else might be missing? What other violations of trust would I discover? My son had used my hospitalization as an opportunity to steal from me, but I was beginning to suspect the theft had started long before I'd landed in the emergency room. My house felt different the moment I walked through the front door. Nothing obviously wrong, but there was a sense of intrusion, like someone had been moving through my private spaces while I was gone. I stood in the entryway, listening to the familiar sounds of the old house settling, trying to identify what was triggering my unease. Then I saw it. The small table by the front door where I kept my mail was empty. Not just clear, completely empty. I always had a stack of bills, advertisements, and letters there, but now the polished wood surface was bare. Someone had been here, and they'd been thorough. I moved through the house systematically, checking each room. The living room looked normal, but my desk drawers were slightly ajar. The kitchen appeared untouched, but when I opened the junk drawer where I kept important documents, it was organized in a way that wasn't natural to me. Someone had been through my papers, and they'd tried to cover their tracks. My home office was where the real violation became clear. The filing cabinet I'd locked before going to the hospital was open, and my financial records were gone. Bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, all missing. But whoever had taken them had been clever enough to leave the folders, creating the illusion that nothing was missing unless you looked closely. I sat down at my desk, my chest tight with more than just surgical pain. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was planned, methodical. My son had used my hospitalization as an opportunity to conduct a thorough inventory of my assets. The car was just the beginning. My phone rang. Michael. "Dad, I'm coming over. We need to talk about your living situation. The house is too big for you now, and with the stairs and all the maintenance." His voice was casual, like we were discussing the weather instead of my life. "I'm fine in my house." I looked around the office, noting other small signs of intrusion. "Besides, I'm not sure I want to see you right now." "Dad, I know you're upset about the car, but you need to think rationally. I've been going through your finances, and the situation is worse than you realize. The house is falling apart, the property taxes are behind, and Mom's care costs are escalating. You can't afford to keep living like this." Going through my finances. He said it like it was his right, like my privacy was a luxury I could no longer afford. "Michael, you went through my house while I was in the hospital. You took my financial records without permission. I was trying to help. Someone needs to make sure your affairs are in order." His tone was patient, condescending. "You had a heart attack, Dad. You could have died. What if I hadn't been there to handle things?" "You mean, what if you hadn't been there to steal from me?" Silence. Then, "I'm coming over. We're going to sit down and discuss this like adults." "No, we're not. You're not welcome in my house." The words came out stronger than I felt. "Not until you return my car and explain why you thought it was okay to forge my signature." "Dad, the car is sold. The money is in your account. You need to accept that and move on." His voice was getting harder, losing the pretense of patience. "I'm trying to save you from yourself. By stealing from me? By making the hard decisions you're too emotional to make." There it was, the real Michael. Not the concerned son, but the man who decided his father was incompetent and needed to be managed. I'll be there in an hour. We're going to straighten this out. I hung up and immediately called Officer Martinez. My son is coming over, and I don't want him in my house. Can you send someone? Are you afraid he'll hurt you physically? I considered the question. I don't know, but I know he's already hurt me in every other way. I told her about the missing financial records, the obvious signs that my house had been searched. He's been planning this for a while. We'll send a patrol car. In the meantime, don't let him in.
And if he has a key, consider changing the locks. A key? Of course he had a key. I'd given him one years ago, back when I trusted him, back when I thought having a key to his father's house was about family, not opportunity. I wondered how many times he'd been here without my knowledge, how long he'd been preparing for this moment. I spent the next hour going through what remained of my papers, trying to assess the damage. My checkbook was still in the desk, but several pages were missing, blank checks that could be used to access my accounts. My investment statements were gone, along with my insurance policies and Social Security information. Everything a person would need to assume control of another person's finances. But Michael had made one mistake. He'd been so focused on paper documents that he'd overlooked the laptop I kept in my bedroom closet. I'd bought it 2 years ago to video chat with my wife when she first moved to the nursing home, back when she still recognized me most days. It had all my financial information saved in bookmarks, and more importantly, it had access to my online banking. I logged in and started checking my accounts. The $68,000 from the car sale was there, as Michael had said. But there were other transactions I didn't recognize. Small withdrawals over the past 6 months, always just under the amount that would trigger a fraud alert. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. My son had been stealing from me for months, testing my attention, seeing how much he could take before I noticed. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Michael's BMW in the driveway, and behind it, a police patrol car. Officer Martinez had kept her word. I opened the door to find Michael standing there with another man in an expensive suit. "Dad, this is my attorney, David Bramwell. We need to discuss your capacity to make financial decisions." The word capacity hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about helping me anymore. This was about having me declared incompetent so he could take control of everything legally. "You're not coming in," I said, "and neither is your lawyer." Officer Martinez appeared beside them. "Mr. Harrison, is there a problem here?" "Yes," I said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "My son stole my car, forged my signature, and has been embezzling from my accounts. Now he's brought a lawyer to have me declared incompetent so he can steal the rest." Michael's face went white. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of the surgery, the medications." "I'm thinking clearly enough to know that you've been stealing from me for months." I held up the laptop, showing the screen with my banking records. "Small amounts, irregular intervals. You thought I wouldn't notice." The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, I'm here to help facilitate a conversation about your care needs. Your son is concerned about your well-being. My son is concerned about my bank account." I looked at Michael, searching his face for any sign of the boy I'd raised. "Tell me something, Michael. When did you decide your father was too stupid to manage his own life? It's not about intelligence, it's about capacity. You're 78 years old, you've had a heart attack, and you're making irrational decisions." He gestured toward the police officer, "like calling the police on your own son." "I called the police because you committed fraud. Multiple felonies, actually." I stepped closer, close enough to see the sweat on his forehead. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd just accept that my car was gone and be grateful for your help?" Officer Martinez stepped between us. "Mr. Harrison, do you want to press charges?" I looked at my son, this stranger who shared my DNA but none of my values. "Yes, I want to press charges for fraud, forgery, and theft, and I want a restraining order to keep him away from my house." Michael's lawyer whispered something in his ear, and both men started backing toward the BMW. "This isn't over, Dad. You need help whether you want it or not. The only help I need is protection from you." As they drove away, Officer Martinez handed me a card. "This is for Adult Protective Services. They specialize in financial elder abuse cases. You're going to need help securing your accounts and building a case." I stood in my doorway, watching my son's car disappear around the corner. 37 years of fatherhood, and it had come to this. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was out, and I was finally fighting back. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the office of District Attorney Sarah Chen, watching her review the evidence we'd compiled against my son. The conference table was covered with bank statements, forged documents, and photographs of my stolen car. It looked like the aftermath of a financial hurricane, which in many ways it was. "Mr. Harrison, this is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've seen." DHN, adjusting her glasses. "The documentation is extensive, the pattern of behavior is clear, and the amounts involved make this a serious felony case." Adult Protective Services caseworker Janet Williams nodded in agreement. "We've identified over $47,000 in unauthorized transactions over the past 8 months. The car sale was just the largest single theft. $47,000. I'd been so focused on the Mustang that I'd missed the bigger picture. My son had been systematically draining my accounts, using his knowledge of my habits and his access to my mail to steal from me methodically. The car sale was supposed to be the final act, the big score, that would set him up while leaving me with just enough to survive in whatever facility he'd chosen for me. What about the forged power of attorney documents?" I asked. "We'd discovered that Michael had created fake legal papers, giving him control over my finances, complete with a notarized signature that was clearly fraudulent." "That's a separate felony," Chen explained. "Forging legal documents, especially ones that grant financial control, carries serious penalties. Combined with the theft charges, your son is looking at potentially 5 to 7 years in prison." Prison. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I'd wanted justice, wanted him to face consequences for what he'd done. But hearing it laid out in legal terms made it real in a way that hurt more than I'd expected. "There's something else," Detective Ryan Murphy said, opening a new folder. "We've been investigating your son's finances, and we found something interesting. He's been having serious money problems for months. His house is in foreclosure, he's behind on his car payments, and he owes substantial amounts to several creditors." This was news to me. Michael had always presented himself as successful, living in that upscale neighborhood, driving expensive cars. How serious are his problems? "Serious enough to motivate theft," Murphy replied. "He's facing bankruptcy, and his employer has been investigating some irregularities in his expense reports. He needed money fast, and you were the most accessible source." I thought about the expensive cologne, the silk ties, the lawyer he'd brought to my house. All of it was a facade, a desperate attempt to maintain an image while his life fell apart. He'd stolen from me not just because he thought he could get away with it, but because he was drowning and I was the only lifeline he could reach. "Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you something difficult," DHN said, her voice gentle but professional. "Are you prepared to testify against your son? This case will likely go to trial, and it's going to be emotionally challenging." I looked around the table at these people who'd become my advocates, my protectors against my own child. "What happens if I don't testify?" "Without your testimony, we don't have a case," she replied honestly. "The defense will argue that you gave permission for the transactions, that you're confused about what happened. Your testimony is crucial to proving the criminal intent." The room fell silent as I considered this. Testifying against Michael would make our estrangement permanent, irreversible. But not testifying would mean he'd gotten away with stealing from me, would mean other elderly parents might become his victims. "There's something else," Detective Murphy said. "We've been in contact with your son's employer. The irregularities in his expense reports, they amount to embezzlement. He's been stealing from them, too." The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't an isolated incident brought on by desperation. Michael had become someone who took what he wanted from people who trusted him. His employer, his father, anyone vulnerable enough to be exploited.
My phone buzzed with a text message. I'd changed my number twice since pressing charges, but somehow Michael kept finding ways to contact me. This message was from an unknown number. "Dad, I know you think I'm the bad guy, but everything I did was to protect you. The nursing home has been calling about Mom. She's getting worse, and they need more money for her care. Without the car money, we can't afford to keep her there." I showed the message to the others. Janet Williams frowned as she read it. "This is emotional manipulation, Mr. Harrison. He's trying to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself." But what if he's right about my wife's care? The thought had been haunting me for weeks. What if I can't afford to keep her in the facility? "We've reviewed your finances," Williams assured me. "Even with the stolen money, you have enough for her care. And there are programs available if you need additional help. Your son is lying to manipulate you into dropping the charges." Detective Murphy leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, can I tell you something? I've been working financial crimes for 15 years, and this kind of manipulation is textbook behavior. He's counting on your love for your wife to make you forgive him for stealing from you." "But she is getting worse," I said. "I visited her yesterday, and she didn't recognize me at all. The nurses say she needs more intensive care." "Then we'll make sure she gets it," Williams said firmly. "But not with stolen money, not by rewarding your son for victimizing you." D.A. Chen opened another folder. "There's been a development in your case. Dr. Peterson, the man who bought your car, has been cooperating with our investigation. He's provided evidence that your son specifically sought him out, knowing he was a collector who wouldn't ask too many questions about a quick sale." "What kind of evidence?" "Text messages, emails, records of their conversations. Your son researched potential buyers, found someone who was desperate for that particular model, and targeted him specifically. This wasn't an impulse crime, it was carefully planned fraud." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Michael hadn't just stolen from me. He'd spent time researching how to do it most effectively. He'd studied my routines, my medical schedule, even my collector's market for classic cars. The betrayal was deeper than I'd imagined. "There's more," Murphy continued. "We've traced some of the stolen money to a gambling website. Your son has been placing substantial bets online, losing consistently. This appears to be the source of his financial problems." Gambling. I thought about all the times Michael had talked about investments and opportunities, all the occasions when he'd seemed confident about money despite living beyond his apparent means. He'd been feeding an addiction with my savings, using my trust to fund his self-destruction. "Mr. Harrison," D.A. Chen said, "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to understand something. Your son didn't just steal money from you. He stole your sense of security, your trust in family, your peace of mind during one of the most vulnerable periods of your life. That's not something we can ignore." She was right. The money was significant, but the emotional damage was immeasurable. I'd spent weeks questioning my own judgment, wondering if I was becoming incompetent, if my reactions were reasonable. Michael had made me doubt my own perceptions while systematically robbing me. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Dad, I'm at Mom's facility. She's asking for you. She remembers your name today. Please don't let our problems keep you from seeing her." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar pull of guilt and responsibility. Even knowing it was manipulation, part of me wanted to believe that my wife was asking for me, that she still had moments of clarity where our 43 years of marriage mattered. "He's at the nursing home," I said, showing them the message. Detective Murphy was already reaching for his radio. "We can have officers there in 10 minutes.
If he's violating the restraining order by attempting to contact you— No, I said, standing up. I want to go there myself. I want to see my wife, and I want to confront him. I'm tired of hiding from my own son. Mr. Harrison, that's not advisable, DHN warned. If you confront him without supervision, anything you say could complicate the prosecution. Then come with me. I looked around the table at these people who'd become my allies. All of you. Let's end this today. The drive to Sunset Manor felt like traveling toward a final confrontation that had been building for months. I sat in the back of Detective Murphy's unmarked car, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, thinking about the last time I'd visited my wife. She'd been having a bad day, confused and frightened, calling for her mother, who'd been dead for 20 years. But there were still good days, moments when she smiled at me with recognition, when 43 years of love broke through the fog of disease. As we pulled into the nursing home parking lot, I could see Michael's BMW in the visitor section. He was inside, probably charming the staff, playing the role of the devoted son, just as he'd been playing the role of the caring child during my hospitalization. "Remember," Detective Murphy said as we walked toward the entrance, "let us handle the legal aspects. You focus on seeing your wife." But I knew that seeing my wife and confronting my son were inseparable now. Michael had used her condition to manipulate me, had made her care a weapon in his arsenal of guilt and control. It was time to reclaim both my dignity and my responsibility to the woman I'd loved for 43 years. The automatic doors of Sunset Manor opened, and I stepped inside to face whatever truth was waiting for me.
The nursing home lobby smelled like disinfectant and cafeteria food, but underneath those institutional odors was something else. The faint perfume my wife had worn for 40 years, still somehow lingering in the places where she spent her days. I followed Detective Murphy and DHN through the familiar corridors, past the common room where residents sat watching television with vacant eyes, toward my wife's room. Michael was there, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand and speaking in the gentle voice he'd used as a child when he was in trouble. My wife, Margaret, was looking at him with the polite confusion she wore when strangers visited, her silver hair neatly combed by the nursing staff, her blue eyes still beautiful despite their emptiness. "Dad," Michael said, standing quickly when he saw me in the doorway, "I'm so glad you came. Mom's been asking for you." I looked at my wife, who turned toward me with no recognition whatsoever. "Hello," she said politely, the way she greeted all visitors now. "Are you here to see someone?" The lie was exposed immediately. Margaret hadn't asked for me because she didn't remember me. Michael had been betting that my love for her would override my anger at him, that I'd choose family loyalty over justice. He'd been counting on 43 years of marriage to make me forget that he'd stolen from me. "Mrs. Harrison," Detective Murphy said gently, showing his badge, "I'm Detective Murphy. We're here on official business with your son." Margaret looked at the badge with mild interest, then at Michael. "Is this your father, dear? He seems very serious." Michael's face went pale. "Dad, we don't need to do this here. Mom's having a good day, and seeing police will upset her." "She's not having a good day," I said, sitting down in the chair on the other side of her bed. "She doesn't know who any of us are, but you're still using her to manipulate me." I took my wife's hand, feeling the familiar weight of her wedding ring, the softness of skin that had aged alongside mine. "Margaret, it's Robert, your husband." She smiled politely. "It's very nice to meet you, Robert. Are you new here?" The words hit me like they always did, but today there was something different. Today I wasn't drowning in grief over what I'd lost. I was angry about what had been taken from me while I was vulnerable, what my son had stolen while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. "Michael Harrison," DHN said formally, "you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. You have the right to remain silent." Michael's lawyer appeared in the doorway as if he'd been waiting in the hallway. "Detective, my client has prepared a statement. He's willing to cooperate fully with your investigation." "Cooperate?" I stood up, careful not to disturb Margaret, who was watching the proceedings with detached curiosity. "He's been stealing from me for months. He forged my signature. He sold my car without permission. What exactly is he going to cooperate with? Mr. Harrison, the lawyer said smoothly, my client acknowledges that mistakes were made, but his intentions were always to help you manage your affairs during a difficult time. He's prepared to make full restitution. Mistakes? The word came out louder than I'd intended, causing Margaret to look startled. I lowered my voice, remembering where we were. Forging legal documents isn't a mistake. Planning to have me declared incompetent isn't a mistake. Stealing my car while I was recovering from heart surgery isn't a mistake. Michael finally spoke, his voice breaking slightly. Dad, I was trying to save you from making bad decisions. You're getting older, Mom's condition is expensive, and you needed someone to look out for your interests. I needed someone to respect my choices. I needed someone to ask permission before touching my property. I needed a son, not a financial predator. Detective Murphy stepped forward with handcuffs. Mr. Harrison, we need to process you at the station. Your lawyer can meet us there. As they led Michael away, he turned back to me one last time. Dad, I'm sorry. I really thought I was helping. I watched my son being escorted through the nursing home lobby in handcuffs, past the residents and staff who'd seen him visit his mother dozens of times. The devoted son, the man who'd seemed so concerned about his parents' welfare, was being arrested for stealing from his father. Margaret squeezed my hand gently. That young man seemed upset. I hope he's all right. He will be, I said, meaning it for the first time in weeks. Eventually, he'll be all right. D.A. Chen had stayed behind to speak with me privately. Mr. Harrison, I know this was difficult, but you did the right thing. Did I? I just had my own son arrested in front of his mother, who doesn't understand what's happening. You protected yourself and potentially other victims. Men like your son don't usually stop with one target. She handed me a business card. The victim advocate will call you tomorrow to discuss the next steps, and we should have your car back within the week. My car? In all the drama of the arrest, I'd almost forgotten about the Mustang. What about Dr. Peterson? He lost $68,000. The state has a victim restitution fund. Between that and your son's assets, Dr. Peterson should recover most of his loss. And when your son is sentenced, restitution will be part of the judgment. After everyone left, I sat with Margaret for another hour, holding her hand and telling her about our early years together, about the house we'd bought, the trips we'd taken, the son we'd raised. She listened politely, occasionally asking who I was or if I knew where her mother was. But for that hour, it didn't matter that she didn't remember. What mattered was that I remembered, and that I was finally free to care for her without the shadow of my son's manipulation hanging over us.
2 weeks later, I got a call from the police impound lot. My Mustang was ready for pickup. Detective Murphy offered to drive me there, and as we walked through the rows of confiscated vehicles, I wondered what I'd feel when I saw the car again. There it was, exactly as I'd left it, except for a thin layer of dust. Grabber blue with white racing stripes, chrome bumpers reflecting the afternoon sun. I unlocked the door and slid behind the wheel, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and motor oil, feeling the weight of the gear shift in my hand. The engine turned over immediately, settling into the rumbling idle that had been the soundtrack of my relationship with my son for 37 years. But now it sounded different, not like a memory of what we'd lost, but like a promise of what I might still have. "Where to?" Detective Murphy asked, leaning against his patrol car. I thought about the empty house waiting for me, about the nursing home where my wife wouldn't recognize me tomorrow either, about the son who'd chosen theft over trust. Then I thought about Dr. Peterson, who'd been as much a victim as I was, who'd appreciated the car's beauty even during our brief, strange encounter. "I think I need to make a phone call first," I said, pulling out my phone. Dr. Peterson answered on the second ring. "Mr. Harrison, is everything all right?" "Dr. Peterson, I have a proposition for you. My car is back, and I've been thinking about what you said, about looking for a '67 Shelby for years. Are you still interested? There was a pause. Are you offering to sell it to me? I'm offering to sell it to someone who'll appreciate it properly, someone who wasn't part of the crime that stole it from me. I looked at the car, at 37 years of memories made tangible. But I have one condition. I want to deliver it to you personally, and I want to tell you its real history, not the sanitized version my son probably gave you. Mr. Harrison, I'd be honored. An hour later, I was driving my Mustang through the streets I'd traveled with my son all those years ago, past the high school where I'd taught him to drive, past the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated his 16th birthday. But I wasn't driving toward the past anymore. I was driving toward Dr. Peterson's house, toward a man who would value what I was giving him, who would understand that some things are worth more than their price tag. When I pulled into his driveway, he was waiting in his garage, which was indeed full of classic cars, lovingly maintained and beautifully displayed. He approached the Mustang with the reverence of someone who understood automotive history. "She's even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, running his hand along the fender. "Are you sure about this?" I handed him the keys and the title, properly signed this time. "I'm sure. Just promise me you'll drive it. Cars like this weren't meant to be museum pieces." As I walked away from my car for the last time, heading toward the cab that would take me home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because the weight of memories was gone, but because I'd finally chosen who deserved to carry them forward. My son had taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, trust, and love freely given rather than manipulation cleverly disguised. I'd lost a son, but I'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could still make choices that honored both my past and my future. The cab driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there? You look like a man who's just made a big decision." "I am," I said, watching my former car disappear around a corner in the hands of someone who would treasure it. "I just chose who gets to be my family."